Today we're going to talk about 3 moves out of Ying's Guan Taiji form. That it will be diagonal whip and slow palm slanting flying and wind blowing lotus leaf, and talk about what they have in common. But first I want to tell you, for many years I taught many students Taiji form, and one thing that was always in common was the eagerness to learn the next move and then the next move and then the next move until they got to the end. And when they finally got to the end, the one thing I told all of them was, now that you've learned the whole form, you can really learn the Tai Chi. And what I mean by that is because of the eagerness to learn the next move, they always were concentrating into the future. But once you've learned the whole form, now you can slowly investigate all the different aspects of the form itself. And it goes along with my idea that learning, according to the Western mind, looks like a linear progression. You start from when you're a beginner, and it's a long line, and then at the end, supposedly, you become advanced. But learning, to me, is not really like that at all. I kind of compare it to like a coil, like a spring that goes around and around and around. And instead of like a progression where you kind of learn on a linear line, it's more like you come back to the same move, like you come around on top of the coil and you're one level higher, and then you go around again, and later on in your progression you're in the same move but you have a different totally understanding of it. And I really like that concept because when you do one move over and over, like diagonal whip, it's not just repeating the move over and over, but what can you learn from that move, and how can you like get deeper into the understanding of that move. And so my video presentations for presenting the idea that understanding the function of the move will help you in your Dalu, understanding how to apply the idea of the function or the use of the move, or the understanding just the concept of the move, will help you to reform your Dalu, your fixed form, so that you can present that concept that you're understanding. And I always say again that when people view your presentation of the Dalu, if they have the seeing eye, they'll be able to see this. So I'm going to do these moves, and I want you to watch carefully every little aspect of my footwork and everything like that. And as we go into the presentation of my understanding of the application, I want you to kind of see how that affected the way that I eventually have come to do each of these moves. So in the first one, diagonal whip. Diagonal whip comes after the last move that we learned, which was the press in G. And although in doing the form every day in the space, I'm probably facing a different direction, I'll do it so that in the camera view you can see a bit better view of it. So after G, you come back and do diagonal whip. So diagonal whip, diagonal whip looks very similar to single whip, but the function is very different. So the next one will be slow palm slanting flying, and it comes after repulsed monkey. Feet together, step out. Again, I'm asking you to look at how I do this move, and as I do the presentation and the function, you'll be able to go back and see it. It might be different than the way you do it, but this is the way I've come to do my move. Again, from repulsed monkey, step together, step out. A lot of times when you're doing your form, the emphasis might be on presenting the concept of the function, or it might be, for example, just kind of flow. So if you view my other videos of me doing the Guang Ping, you might not always see that exact same presentation of that function, because in that moment I might be concentrating on the smoothness and the flow and kind of more expression. But generally speaking, the concepts will always be there inside. Okay, so we did that, and the next one would be Wind Blowing Lotus Leaf, and Wind Blowing Lotus Leaf comes after separation of the right foot and coming down. So I'll do a couple of them. Here after the kick, come down, and so forth, okay? So what do these moves have in common? Well, what they have in common is that they are basically taking the opponent and sweeping them over your leg, okay? If you understand basically self-defense and fighting and all that, the opponent will always have his, if I'm in this position here, going over the right leg, then you're always sweeping to the back side of the opponent. So therefore the opponent's left leg will be right here, and I'll be coming in and sweeping this way. Sweeping, his back will be there over my leg. So you never, if he's like right leg forward, you would not be applying him because he can just bend over. So it's always to the back side of the opponent. So in diagonal whip is the horizontal presentation of that sweeping over the leg. Again, that's why in diagonal whip, as opposed to single whip, the presentation of the arm is horizontal and using your body for the power coming over the leg. So again, the opponent's left leg would be in front here and his back would be this way, coming back over the opponent. In slow palm slanting flying, I'm again coming up, his leg is here, I'm coming up, taking his arm and coming up underneath the arm. And then if you notice when I do my presentation of slow palm slanting flying, I'm coming across the leg at the end and making sure that instead of just coming up, I'm coming up and changing that into a cross, taking the opponent over the leg. So we'll go into each of these more in detail. Again, in Wind Blowing Lotus Leaf, if I do it on this side, again, the opponent's left leg is going to be in front. And again, all of these are interchangeable so that if you're doing diagonal whip, you want to be able to learn how to do diagonal whip on opposite side Taiji. And we'll, in another video presentation, I'll go into the whole idea of doing your Taiji on the reverse side so that you're more ambidextrous in the application of the moves. But in this case, doing diagonal whip, I'd be doing the same presentation of arm being horizontal or sweeping the opponent over the leg. So again, in the presentation of single whip, you learn that as Fung, so the linear force going forward. In diagonal whip, it's horizontal going over this. And again, this is what something that Sifu emphasized when I was learning the form, and he was teaching me to teach it, that he wanted to emphasize that diagonal whip was that sweeping motion rather than single whip, which is the linear motion. In going to slow palm slanting flying again, stepping out, strong in the horse, coming up, staying in the root, it's very important. And in the slow palm slanting flying, The idea is as you're coming up, it's like uprooting. So the opponent, you're kind of coming up underneath the armpit and kind of like lifting the opponent high. So the force is kind of high and diagonal here. And again, in trying to use this in actual pushing hands and application, I found myself personally that when you come up, if the elbow is in this area of the chest, the solar plexus underneath, just that little bit of a turn, like a corkscrew, really kind of uproots the opponent, and then you can really kind of like uproot them. So when I'm doing my presentation, from what I've learned in application, I like to emphasize that little turn of the hand at that point, and then continue the rotation over the knee. So I always try to emphasize coming up, turn over the knee. And if you watch my video presentations of me doing the slanting form, you might be able to see that every time that I do that, that's my personal understanding of the application of this move, and it's translated back into the way that I express that move in my dalu. And so that's the whole point of these videos, is to try to get you to experiment with the moves, gain your own understanding, and then come back with your own expression of your understanding in that dalu. That's mainly the concept of these videos, not necessarily to teach you the application, but more to kind of, as you experiment with the form, come back with your own understanding of it and your own presentation of it. You don't have to repeat the form over and over and over exactly the same way as your teacher taught you. You need to come with your own understanding, and the form becomes part of you, and it expresses your understanding. That's the main thing that I'm trying to present in these videos. Okay, so in Wind Blowing Lotus Leaf, it's a similar move. You're coming down. This time in Wind Blowing Lotus Leaf, the expression is down over your knee, whereas slow palm slanting flying is uprooting. And so in uprooting, you're not necessarily like want to sink down as you're uprooting, because you're kind of going against the force. You just want to have a solid root, and then kind of have like an expression of uprooting the opponent over here. For myself, I found that if the person is really tall, like I had this friend, his name was Carl. He was like this guy that was 6'4". So for me, being a shorty, trying to uproot somebody that tall using, going underneath the armpit didn't work so well. So I probably tend to be better to use the low sinking. Okay, so in Wind Blowing the Lotus Leaf, it's the same concept, using the waist for the power of the rotation, using the arm and the elbow, and sweeping an opponent over your knee. And it's like, again, downward, downward. So those are the similarities of the three moves. And so as you do these moves in the dalu, if you think about this application of the moves: diagonal whip, horizontal sweep, slow palm slanting flying, uprooting. Again, make sure, if you're trying to present the idea of the sweep, to come across the knee, because if you just go to here, you're not going to really be sweeping the opponent. You're missing that second half of it. And again, I'm not telling you you're doing it wrong. I'm just saying that for me, this is the way that I've learned how to express my own understanding. And in Wind Blowing Lotus Leaf, again, having a strong root and sinking, because as you're trying to sink the opponent down over your knee, I found that sinking was very important in the application of the move. And finally, on Wind Blowing Lotus Leaf, it's important in the transition that you finish the move. If you watch again how I presented at the beginning, I finish the move, do the final expression, and then I do the pivot for the next step. Come in, step out, finish the move, and then the rotation to the foot. If I see people doing this, so they're pivoting before they actually finish the step, then my understanding is that they're not presenting that same idea, because if you were actually sweeping somebody over your leg, you wouldn't want to be pivoting that leg as you're sweeping it, because you're taking away the actual element of the person going over that knee. By giving in, he's not, that's kind of opposite of the idea. Also, you're pivoting at that point means that you're disrupting your root, because you can't have root when you're pivoting like that. So therefore, I always wait till I'm finished with a move and then pivot into the next move. And again, as we get more into these videos, the concept of basic good Kung Fu principles always applies. And as I try to develop my Dalu for myself, I'm always questioning each of these concepts, the way that I present it, the way that I kind of formulate it, the way that I do it. I always question everything. Am I following good Kung Fu principle by waiting and then pivoting, or if I'm getting too much flow by pivoting, and it might look prettier, but then that breaks my concept of trying to apply the concept of the function and show the function in the Dalu. So these are all just kind of ideas I'm kind of pushing out to the audience. In a way, it's more for people who already know the form, and they're kind of looking for ways to explore invigorating their understanding of the Dalu, the fixed form of the Guanping form. And again, that video presentation I did of doing it on a 4x6 mat was essentially the same thing, to try to get people to push that boundary of just doing the same form day after day after day, exactly the same, and thinking that by some way doing that, you're perfecting it. Well, you're perfecting what you're doing, but you're not perfecting your understanding of it. By pushing the boundaries of trying to learn how to, in the same space, from here, cloud hands, and then stepping back into single whip. Just even presenting that video, so I had to kind of like analyze how to fit the form into that space, taught me a lot. And again, if you give yourself kind of a test by doing that, then you can kind of like learn a lot, because it pushes your boundary. So that you have to kind of think, well, how would I present this so that Wind Blowing Lotus Leaf, I couldn't just pivot and go to the next move. I had to learn how to be able to switch and do the same move. And that kind of goes back to my understanding of how in the old days they might have practiced the Taiji. You might take one move and experiment with that one move over and over in application, or just by itself, and learn everything you could about that one move, so that it's not necessarily like the sequence of the moves in the form, but the move itself has its own world for you to explore. I think in a future video we'll be doing the opposite side, Tai Chi, and I'm going to present like exercises where you can practice like this one, slow palm, slanting, flying, and you'll be able to do it basically on both sides, like this. And then you kind of go back and forth and see that your expression on both sides are the same. So I hope you enjoy this presentation, and give you something to think about in performing the diagonal whip, the slow palm slanting flying, and Wind Blowing Lotus Leaf. Thank you very much.